Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Teens for Business. I'm your host, Jackie.
I'm Kylie.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Ivan.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We'll be discussing the movie industry, specifically the box office and movie economics after COVID-19, and then we'll transition into a specific case study into the industry. Okay, so for this episode, we'll focus mainly on movies and movies' commercial success. So before we jump into our discussion, just to open up with something kind of more fun, do you guys enjoy going to movie theaters and then watching the movies? What's your favorite part about going?
Me personally, haven't been to a theater after COVID yet, so I don't really much what changed physically at the movie theaters, but I remember distinctly before COVID, like going to movie theaters would be kind of a special occasion because it is usually pretty pricey. Depends on what you want. Like there's many different options. You have like the regular one, and then you have like those reclining seats ones, and then you have like IMAX or whatever. But definitely did enjoy going to watching movies at theaters, and probably the favorite part about going there is probably like the reclining chairs. That kind of makes it have like a homey feeling. Before, like if it when we didn't have that, like I would definitely prefer to be at home because the luxury of having stuff and like enhanced reach. But once the movie theater started incorporating these kind of things, it started being more and more worth going physically.
I'm not too much of a movie guy, but like again, as the same situation as Ivan, I haven't actually been to like a movie theater after COVID and like after the pandemic. But like before COVID, when I used to go to some movie theaters, I used to like go with friends, just have like a night out. And I know that like going to like the movie theaters are kind of like expensive, so we just like treat it as a hangout. And then yeah, just like Ivan said, the comfy chairs in the theater rooms are like really comfy.
Yeah, I've actually been to the theater like a couple of times, but like I still prefer, with so many like streaming services nowadays and like, websites that give you free streaming and stuff like that. There's like I don't know, like I wouldn't say illegal, but like, like those free streaming websites, I like it's more worth it to just stay at home because like movie tickets are pricey. They charge extra for like their food and stuff. So yeah, like I like going to the theater, but like it's you probably have more like economic value to staying at home and watching a movie.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that take. I mean, I've been to the movie theater a couple of times after COVID, but it's like not to go watch a movie. It's like more of a social event to like hang out with your friends and have fun, not purely, okay, let me see this new movie kind of thing. But I don't know, I always find them fun. Okay, so now to talk a little bit about movies. Their commercial success is one of like the most important indicators of their overall success. Of course, like some movies are they have like a really big cultural relevance, but they might not be shown in theaters when that cultural relevance starts like increasing. So, but commercial success is really important, especially like movie theaters. And then now with streaming services, that becomes like another factor to it. But to talk about like the actual theater part, one of the most famous indicators is kind of known as like the box office. So that's where we hear like, oh, that was such a big box office hit or things like that. Um, and that kind of just means that the movie earned a lot of money. And usually like it's during tracking week and a lot of it is during big holidays or like some Memorial Day weekend, like right now. That's one thing. And then do you guys think box office or just like the indicators of its commercial success is accurate for its popularity or just quality of the film? So does how much it make important to like how well made it was?
So I think the box office sales kind of show the popularity of these, not like the how good the movie is made, because a lot of the highest grossing box office films are obviously decently made because they probably had a lot of money invested in them to have like high quality productions. And then if they're using CGI, good CGI, it's pretty obvious like they spent a lot of money into making a film look good, and it probably did look good. But I think the box office sales are more useful for popularity, because the higher these numbers are, probably more people saw it, whatever. But I personally think that it doesn't really represent how good a film is made. It probably does represent how good the film looks, like, CGI, whatever, animations that cost money, and if they spend enough money, it's gonna look good anyways. But it doesn't really represent if the plot is good, if the actors are actually good or not. That's when I think other scores are more and more important. Like, I think there are two other scores, like Rotten Tomatoes, and then like the actual um the fan opinion of it. Like, I personally know like a lot of good movies that have horrendous box office sales, but they're actually like really good. Like, the actors are just not that well known, and because of that, they're able to act well without depending on their popularity. And sometimes it doesn't work, but the movie itself is probably be really good. And also, like, Rotten Tomatoes also has this problem where, like, the experts, the movie experts, are usually have a different opinion than what the fans or the people who go and watch the movies. They usually have different opinions with that. Like, there are tons of movies with a really bad Rotten Tomatoes scores, but the fans really love it. And so it really just depends. I personally think um the fan score is probably the most accurate, because you know that's who we are. Not We're not like movie critics. We're not production crew. We're people who go in a movie theater and watch the movie for the plot, and maybe if it looks good, probably just sit there and watch it if it looks good. But mainly, it's going to be the plot, how good the actors act. So I think that's what's more important for a good movie.
Yeah, I agree. I think that like fan reviews, fan scores, whatever the fans like rate those like movies are like more important because I feel like that they're like more representative of how a movie like actually is, whether the quality's good, actors good, like plot is good. I think the box office scores, I've heard that term like thrown a lot around like movies and other different things. Like especially I've definitely heard like the more popular movies getting like higher box office scores, but then that could also be because like the actors are less well known and like other stuff like the name recognition effect could attract a lot of audience to watch this particular movie, which could increase their box office score, but it doesn't like really represent like how good like the quality of a movie is because like again like sometimes name recognition could play a role, but other times like there's like other factors like a less well known like company who's like producing the movie rather than like something like really well known like Hollywood or something like that.
Yeah, I think in terms of just like box office like sales, I think it's like somewhat important for, I mean, like most movies that like they all have super like high box office sales like all time. Like for example, I think number one best selling like best grossing movie of all time is Avatar, I think. And like everything in the top 10 is like movies that every single person pretty much knows. And like these are good movies, but like these sales aren't, like as Ivan said, the full indicator of whether or not it's a good movie or not. I'm saying if these movies are grossing to the point that they are with the amount of people that are watching them, that demonstrates what a good movie is as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with all of those perspectives, but it's also interesting to think about like you can have a lot of big actors in a movie and you can still have your movie not do so well at the box office, even though people might like it. Like Babylon, I think, with Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt and Tobey Maguire, like those are all very big names in Hollywood. And it had a really big budget, like 100 or something, $110 million for their budget, and then they only like grossed 60 or so $1 million in their box office, which is like kind of interesting when you think about it because they had kind of all the criteria of having a big budget, having all of these big names in Hollywood, especially Margot Robbie and Brad Pitt, who are like kind of at the top. And then you also have like the plot. A lot of people said like, well, most reviews were favorable, but it still like didn't really do that well in an audience. So I think it's always just really interesting to look at how like box office, you have all the indicators and everything would say, oh, this would probably do really well, but then it kind of doesn't, even though the factors are there. So, okay. And then now for a little bit of history on the box office or just how movie sales have been grossing. So 2019, which was counting the pre-COVID times of 2019, was the second best year for movies and films. And that year pulled in $11.4 billion. And then after those numbers, or after COVID-19, those numbers have obviously slumped because everyone stayed at home and people just preferred Netflix, and they just couldn't go to the theaters. And then the theaters reopened in around late 2020, and obviously that was because COVID and people were scared of catching the virus, or there were lockdowns going on. So obviously, because many people didn't go, it was a huge hit to late 2020. So it would make sense that the numbers for 2020 would obviously be drastically down. But last year, so 2022, the box office reached 7.5 billion, which is technically up 64% from the 4.5 billion dollars in 2021, but that's still like not matching up to 2019, and these numbers are from CNBC. And but that's kind of weird when you think about it, because 2019 was so good, and then obviously you have the COVID year, right? Like that makes sense that the numbers would be down, but 2022 still wasn't even up to 2019 standards. And a lot of industry experts have put the blame on the fact that not a lot of movies have been even made. Like that's why the numbers are less. So obviously less films being produced would mean that there's less total sales. But do you guys think that this is the only reason or one of the main factors, or do you think there are other reasons? Something like there's a shifting of culture that people don't really want to go to a movie theater anymore, and they would just prefer to sit at home with Netflix on their computer.
In my opinion, I definitely think that less films being produced probably did impact total box office like industry, made the film industry seem smaller than 2019, as Jackie said. But I also think that probably the COVID pandemic, everybody sitting at home, everybody suddenly has Hulu, Disney Plus, Netflix, and they are sitting at home and watching movies at home instead of going to theaters. And I remember like Mulan or something, the newer movie was only on Disney Plus, and people literally, if they wanted to go to the theater, they couldn't because it was literally on the streaming service. And I think that kind of impacted the philosophy around, okay, how do we produce movies? How do we market it? How do we give ways for our fans to watch the movie that we just created? And that shift towards streaming services, and especially COVID, made it kind of, there's no incentive for people to go to a theater. Like you suddenly now have to get out of your house, get out of your bed, drive to a theater, and then hope that the movie tickets aren't bad. You know, maybe they're too expensive, or you get a really bad seat. Who knows? Um, but now people I think are more, they have more incentives to stay at home because all these films are also going to be available on streaming services. Like most of the big films, popular films, probably did have like contracts with one of the streaming services to have their movies on there. And more streaming services are having these movies now, and it's just way easier for people to stay at home and watch these movies. And like you don't have to pay like $5 for Sour Patch Kids, right? So I think there's way more incentive for people to just actually stay at home. And now that movie studios have realized this, they're gonna be like, okay, then I'll focus more on marketing on streaming services rather than at the physical theater.
Okay, so this is I think that less like films being produced does like it did like take out a little bit like the box office sales like in 2022 and compared to like 2019. Maybe this could be attributed to like certain like factors that like occurred like in the world. Like the pandemic really hadn't ended yet. Like in mid 2022 during summer, there was like a little bit of a COVID spike and then it went back down again. So like some people, maybe some actors that got sick while on set and the movie had to be like postponed and stuff. But I do think from my experience, like I think that the culture shift has had that higher influence in like this trend because like a lot of people like are they can like stay at home, they can like I don't know how much like these streaming services cost, but I feel like if you go to the movie theater, it costs more, so it's like kind of like cost effective to like stay home. I do think that like going to theaters is like a pastime. It's like a tradition for like a lot of people. It's like a way to have fun. But like especially in those like there was definitely been a shift of culture that resulted from the COVID pandemic. And I think people have like gotten a lot used to it. And movies have also like movie producers have also gotten used to it because they like started to market more like online on Hulu, Netflix, Disney Plus, and other streaming services. And they've some movies are also available on like YouTube Premium or something like that, and that's like super cost of cost effective too because they can just watch it at home. Even some arguments can be made that there people are like more comfortable watching movies like on their TV while sitting on their sofa and relaxing with their friends instead of like being at like a movie theater. So yeah, I definitely think that the shift of culture has had a larger influence than the amount of movies produced.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I just think that like with movies being like somewhat expensive compared to like the streaming devices that people have like completely switched to during the pandemic, it's more of a thing that's like you don't just go to a movie theater casually. You kind of go like you plan an event with friends or do something like that. But like just to watch a movie, I feel like nowadays like people don't really just go to the theater anymore. Like um there's a lot, it's definitely a cultural shift just with the pandemic and everything else. I just think streaming has become the new normal in the sense that like people used to go to the theaters just regularly, but now people at home there's so many different other options for you.
Yeah, I agree. I think the kind of culture shift that we talked about with like just going home and watching a movie as opposed to going to the movie theater as your social event. You can just sit at home, um, invite your friends over or like watch with them online or something, things like that. I think that like was really big during the pandemic, and I think people found it to be a lot easier. Like you don't have to pay all this extra money to have like kind of the same effect basically. I think when people realized that during the pandemic, that kind of just retained with them. And that just kind of kept on going after the pandemic, even after when like all of the movie theaters reopened. But that brings me to my next point. So I think it's really interesting because after COVID-19, there was this whole concept of like pent up demand and like that we can see it actually happening before our eyes. So things like vacations, going to Disney, for example, just a lot of things people wanted to do, but they couldn't do during the pandemic. And then all of a sudden, when things started opening back up, or like when people thought that the world was a little bit safer after the virus, um, they all just kind of started like wanting to do new things or like do fun things, kind of things for entertainment. But I think it's really interesting that you see all this pent up demand in other industries, but why haven't we seen this in like the movie industry, right? With like going to the movie theater, because you could probably argue that yes, we experience how easy streaming services are, but can't we see that for other pent up demand things too? So why specifically the movie industry? Like why did that happen, do you think?
I personally believe that, well, we can see it happen with differences between like movie and movies, and then you have like TV series. I remember during the pandemic, there were a few TV series that everybody watched. Like there wasn't anybody who didn't watch these TV series, like Euphoria or like the Ortega one. I forgot the name, but basically, these TV series I think are probably getting more popularity than the movies themselves. Obviously, there are really good grossing movies recently. Um, like maybe Top Gun from like last year. It was like quite a while back, but Top Gun I remember did do pretty well in box office. But like there are definitely movies that are still probably worth going to theaters to. Like people are still going to theaters for movies, but I think to a lesser extent because maybe TV series I think are getting more popularity than movies themselves, especially because as we touched about this point many times before, that streaming services are just making life easier for people, right? Streaming services focus more on TV series rather than movies. Obviously, I have both, but there's definitely a more focus on TV series, and people are just eating that up because, you know, I have this subscription I'm paying like $17 for every month. I'm gonna use it, right? I'm not gonna go watch a movie when everyone else is watching this other TV show I haven't caught up with because I had work every single day of the week and now I have time. I'm gonna watch a TV series. I'm not gonna go to the theater, right? I'm gonna catch up and so I can talk about this with other people who watch this show. And for movies, like I can watch it when it comes to streaming service. I don't need to go to movie theaters. I can, watch another episode and then maybe I can watch the movie afterwards. And so that's why I think this pent up demand really didn't cause such a huge change in the movie industry after the pandemic kind of ended. People felt safer. Yeah, that's why I think the film industry is just different from Disneyland because Disneyland or like other attractions, because you can't go to Disneyland at home, right? You have to go there physically to enjoy with your family, friends. So that's why I think these places, traveling tourist spots, they're gonna have this increase in demand right after people feel safer, but not the movie theater.
Yeah, I agree. Cause like movies, like as we like saw in the pandemic, we had like so many different like alternative like options. Like we had Hulu, Disney Plus, we had all these like different like streaming services that we could watch movies on. So like that was definitely like a new like technological like innovation that kind of like continued like the movies like throughout the pandemic. But what we couldn't do in the pandemic was go outside and not worry about our safety. Now we can do that, and now it's like I feel like it's like kind of like more exciting if you like experience it in person, and that could also like apply to like movies too. But like movies, like if you watch like a movie at home, like this kind of ties with my earlier point. Like it's like you don't have to pay as much if you like do like it in person, but like there's no alternative option for like traveling to like different places to like experience like different things that you may have not experienced before. And that's why I feel like so many people are like really want to travel after like the pandemic because they really missed experiencing those things on like yearly basis.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I just think that it's kind of the difference of like convenience again with movies. Like they kind of never fully recovered just because people kind of realized that switching there was a temp kind of they thought would be a temporary thing with the pandemic. They just found that watching movies at home with the growth in streaming services was just more convenient for them. It was a better option, whereas like for vacations it's just that they couldn't go on vacation at all during the pandemic, right? Because they're stuck at home. But now that you can go, you would rather spend your money on things that you couldn't do during the pandemic rather than you still could watch movies at home. It's just the difference in the pent up demand where movies was always available to you and you found a more convenient way to do them, whereas like different other activities that you really couldn't do during the pandemic, and now that's where people are spending their money.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. And also if we look at like other industries besides like um going to Disneyland, if we look at like for example restaurants or like dining in person versus like getting food sent to your house by DoorDash or Uber Eats, there was like a little bit of pent up demand when it first started, but there was also research that showed like the restaurant industry still is like not fully recovered, or like at least a little back. It still wasn't fully recovered. And so I think it's really interesting when you consider how much like COVID-19 taught people about like just the ease of getting things sent to your house and not having to leave your house at all. And obviously during COVID, that made sense because you shouldn't have left your house if you were in lockdown. But if you were like after lockdown, a lot of people still chose to keep things in their house, like get food sent to their house or just eat at their own homes instead of going out to eat and watch movies in their own houses, instead of going to a theater. And so I think like those changes kind of also show up in other industries as well. Okay, and for our final question for this episode, to wrap things up, in connection with streaming in theaters, because like Evan said, and I think this was actually a really good point, a lot of people when they associate like TV shows, it's usually with streaming, because you don't really go to movie theater to watch a TV show, like right, it's a movie theater. But I'm curious, do you guys prefer watching like a 10 episode long TV show, or do you prefer watching a 1.5 hour long movie?
For me, I definitely both TV shows and movies definitely have their pros and cons. Um, and it's really difficult to say which one's actually better, um, qualitatively or quantitatively. But in my opinion, I definitely prefer watching TV shows more generally because when I have time to watch a movie or watch a TV show, it's generally like already 3 a.m. So like it's not really feasible for like busy people with like jobs or people who have things to do. Generally they don't really have a good time to go to a theater. Like theater is probably like worth going if you have friends and family going with you. You can share afterwards. You know, that's kind of the joy of going to theater. Like if everyone had time in like 3 p.m. and then it's like probably good better idea instead of watching a TV show at home, it's probably a better idea to go to a movie theater because it's just generally a better experience. But for me, most of my experience is sitting alone at home and it's being really late at night. I'm like, hey, why not just watch a TV show, you know? And I can binge until like 3 a.m. and like, oh crap, I need to go to sleep. Um, that's why I generally like watching TV shows a little bit more because they also you can watch it whenever you want, however you want, and that just fits my time schedule better, um, because of the way my time is scheduled right now.
For me, I'm like more neutral on this. Like I've like had my fair share of both movies and TV show experiences. I watched a few movies throughout after like AP exams, a few of my classes, particularly my physics class, and then TV shows. We in my Spanish class, we just watched one throughout the whole year. So like I've had my fair share of like movies and TV shows, and both of them are like pretty good depending on like the plot line. I found both types to be very entertaining, and like I think for me, if I were to have like free time, again, like based on my busy schedule, I guess I would like see if like TV shows are more available because they're like shorter like time span compared to movies. But if I had longer time, maybe planning a schedule to hang out with my friends and stuff, I'd probably stick to a movie.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that as well. I just think that I prefer like uh, it depends whether like the event, of course, and then it's just like the convenience of watching movies at home. Like maybe for like social events you're going out to theaters and stuff, but in general, just in terms of just watching movies and shows through streaming devices is definitely the way to go for me.
Yeah, I think it's actually interesting how Jack and Ivan mentioned that like if you're on a shorter time period or like you don't have as much time, you would opt to go for like a TV show or like an episode. I think that's actually really interesting because I would do the opposite because I know like if I start a TV show and I actually end up liking it, not just like watch the first 10 minutes and be like, okay, this is boring and then choose something else. But if I actually like that TV show, I would want to watch like as many episodes as I can, like as quickly as possible because I want to know like what happens at the end. But because of that, and if I'm like super busy, like I don't want to have like 10 episodes waiting for me because I'm just like, I want to finish it, right? So if you're on a shorter time crunch, I would actually be more willing to watch a movie because after that 1 hour and a half or like 2 hours, you're basically done with that movie. Like, yeah, you might have like the second in that series, like if there is a series, but that's like kind of a different, that's like watching the second season. You're not really, there's not that urge to continue watching. It's like, okay, after an hour and a half, you're done. Like, even if you want to watch something else, it's like starting a new season. And that's a little bit different than like watching episode 4 and then being like, oh, I need to watch episode 5 and 6. So I think like if I'm actually like on a time crunch or like I don't have that much time to relax, I would actually opt for a movie instead. Because it's like shorter when you consider that I'm actually like watching the whole thing through. But just personal opinions to round off the episode. Thank you guys all for joining our episode today, and we'll see you in the next round.